Hey friends, Audrey Henley here, and today we're going to be talking about story openings, so stay tuned. So this is actually a collab that I'm doing with a bunch of different author tubers. The person who set this all up is Robert over at Story Dtechtive, so thank you, Robert. And I'm not going to get too much into it, but this is actually probably going to be a series of videos just about different writing topics, and we'll just get a lot of different authors' opinions and ideas about different craft topics, which is really fun. But definitely head over to Robert's channel. I'm certain he's going to tell us a bit more about that, and I'm just really excited to be part of it. And so this is my video on story openings, which is a pretty great topic for the start of a new video series. I'm very excited because there is sunshine. It's the first time this year we've gotten over 60 degrees in Minnesota, and it's very nice to have some natural light in. I think this is my first video using any natural light, so it's very, very exciting. For my video, I wanted to go into basically what story openings are for, what they need to accomplish, and then what some of my favorites have been, and some different approaches to it. As far as I'm concerned, there are three main purposes to a story opening, and this is whether you are planning on getting traditionally published or self-published. But for traditionally published, I really suggest, I guess, putting a little more effort into your opening, or putting a better emphasis on it, because agents aren't as forgiving of readers as I think most readers are. Like, if you're into romance with vampires and you bought an ebook that's self-published, you're going to enjoy that no matter what. You know what to expect. And if the opening's a little slow, you'll probably just get through it anyway. Like, not to say that openings aren't important, but I think with traditionally published authors, you really have to put like an ungodly amount of emphasis on your beginning, because the agent doesn't happen to like your beginning, they won't read further. They're the pickiest readers on the planet as far as I'm concerned, so you really need to put an emphasis on this part. So the first thing is, one, intrigue your reader. That's the first thing your opening needs to do. So you need kind of a hook, kind of something to show how unique your story is and draw interest. It can feel a bit gimmicky, and it is, but it's how you're honestly selling a book. If you're trying to get traditionally published, your pages are part of the package, and they're part of what would convince an agent to represent you. And so your first page is like a wham bam like marketing tactic. And it's sort of the same if you have a book on a bookshelf and a reader opens to the first page and they'll read that to decide if they like the book. That's kind of the same deal. You really need the opening to be exciting and unlike anything else the reader has read before. Two, this is an interesting point, and I think this is where I will diverge from a lot of other writers and what they think, and it's world building. We all know that openings need a bit of world building, right? But as far as I'm concerned, we only need just enough to like not be confused about what's happening. To me, the world building shouldn't be the point of the opening piece at all. Big opinion here, like this is my personal opinion. To me, the most important thing in an opening is to get to know the characters. So we need world building just enough to understand what's happening and not be confused. But I think what's important before understanding the whole world is actually getting to a character and caring about a character, because I'm not going to care about the world unless there's a character in it that I connect to. As far as I'm concerned, your opening just needs enough world building to not be like, what the hell is happening? But it shouldn't be the whole point of your opening. I'm really interested to see what the other author tubers, if they bring up world building at all, will say, because I know certain genre fiction, like I think hard sci-fi, hard fantasy, you might see a lot more world building in the beginning and a higher reader tolerance for that. So I think other writers would tell you something different. But for me, writing more general trade, YA stuff, I like just enough world building to understand what's happening. And three, and the most important in my opinion, is make the reader care about your character. And this is actually why I don't suggest starting in the middle of like a really tense scene on your first chapter, because the reader won't care and it will lose a lot of its impact. If someone is getting hurt and beaten up, we're not going to care yet because we don't know who that person is. Maybe they deserve it, right? We have to prove to the reader that our main character is someone worth following and worth reading about. So you need to establish the character and who they are before you throw them into something crazy. If we know that they really care about their relationship with their mom, then a fight with the mom is going to feel that much more important, gives a lot more depth. So any big action scene, don't stick it at the beginning of the book because it won't have the depth it should because the reader doesn't have that context yet. So with openings, there's this really weird balance of like providing context, making the reader care about the character, intriguing the reader. It's like a lot of things you have to juggle in the air. So I think that's why openings are so incredibly difficult. I wanted to go through some books, openings that happen to just like come to mind right away as, you know, approaches to this challenge of providing context and character information and all of that. These are just 3 examples from books I've read that happen to come to mind. So first example is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. The other 2 are YA examples, so they're not all like classics. And this one has that famous opening line, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of fortune must be in want of a wife." It's this famous line. If you haven't read the rest of the book, what follows right after that is a conversation. It goes straight into a conversation. So this line, this opening line, is a sort of theme statement about the entire novel. You can tell right away it's going to be focusing on some single dude with fortune, and that the idea of marrying and consequence and money, like that's all going to be super important in this story. That single line does a really good job of presenting that. It also presents the tone, which is this sort of third person omniscient narrator who's sassy. That's kind of the Jane Austen like trademark, like just a really wry, dry wit narrator. And then the conversation that follows is also really interesting because so we have our protagonist, Elizabeth, but she's not actually the focus of the opening conversation. She is with her family. I think they're just like going for a walk together. It's her dad and her mom and some sisters and her. And the conversation is actually between the mother and the father, and Elizabeth, the main character's mother, is very excited that a single man is going to be moving into this big mansion that has been empty for a while. She thinks it's exciting, an exciting chance for her 4 daughters to potentially get married. 5 daughters, I think, actually, sorry. It's a good opportunity for one of her 5 daughters to get married, so it's a very big deal. Without any sons, they don't have anyone to inherit their property. So it's very important that they marry their daughters off well so they can have a good life. I'm not going to get into the politics and the historical context too much, but they're really trying to. It's just very important. Marriage is super important in this time. So it's interesting because this conversation does a lot of things. It introduces you to the funny dynamic between Elizabeth's parents. It sets up how important marriage is in the story again. And the most important thing that I find interesting is it alludes to the inciting incident, which is Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy moving into this mansion. And I think it's really interesting to have like a conversation alluding to the inciting incident because it's not the inciting incident, but like you know what's coming. It builds anticipation. You know what to expect. You understand why it's important. It just builds in a lot of context really naturally. So if you have a character who's like waiting for an event, having a conversation about that event is actually kind of an interesting way to set it up, build context, and as long as you can do it in a natural way that doesn't feel like, well, you know, as you know, Bob, it feels natural. It's a really great way to start a book, and I think it's a really interesting example. I don't see it a lot, but I loved this particular opening. My next example is Brightly Burning by Alexa Donne, and this one is sort of the opening I see the most. It's a very standard novel opening. Basically, we have the main character, Stella. She's on the ship, and suddenly the gravity boosters or whatever that keeps the ship having gravity go off. Everyone's floating around. She happens to be a technician, so she has to go fix it. And it's not a super important moment, but it's a moment that has just enough tension to keep the reader interested, and it gives you a lot of context about the character. We know Stella's a technician, she's smart, we know that they're on a spaceship and have gravity boosters or whatever. That just gives you a lot of context. And on the way to get the thing fixed, Stella runs into some side characters and you get introduced to them as well. So like I said, this is a super standard opening. I think like really 60% of books have this kind of opening. I will say it's not my favorite way to open a book. This is nothing against Alexa Donne. Love Alexa Donne's writing, and like I said, I think 60% of books start this way. I don't think it's a bad way by any means. I think most readers probably actually prefer it. Straightforward, easy to get into, gentle way to start the story. And I'm just weird about openings and have a very particular idea about what I like. This one doesn't particularly strike my fancy, but it's just the first page of the book. You know, like, there's so much more to a book than its opening, but unfortunately, again, you have to put so much emphasis on this. So I think this is a perfectly great way to start your story. It just doesn't happen to be my like favorite way to start it, which is like having your main character be in the middle of some mundane task and then running into friends and then having to fix this, like, I don't know. It just doesn't, it almost feels like an arbitrary way to start your story, and it doesn't allude to the inciting incident the same way that the first method of like bringing up the inciting incident about to happen does. Okay, and my last example story opening is Dread Nation by Justina, Ireland. And this one is interesting. I wanted to talk about it because it's a prologue. And if you've been in the writing community for a while, you know that prologues are often looked down upon by agents, or like writer snobs don't like prologues. But we all see prologues all the time in books. They still pop up. And I wanted to talk about this prologue in particular because I think it does a lot of things that most prologues don't do, and it makes it a lot more effective as a prologue than most. Okay, so we have this main character, Jane, and the prologue is essentially the story of her birth. And she's able to tell the story through what she's heard from her mother and her aunt. So she tells the story. She obviously wasn't there, and the story's in first person. So it's basically her telling the story that she's heard from her aunt and her mother. The premise of the story is basically that the midwife tries to kill her as a baby because she was born black from a white woman. And it just sets up a lot of the tone, sets up that we're in the southern United States, and we get a sense of, at the very end of the beginning, that we're in an alternative history of the United States where zombies started rising up at the Battle of Gettysburg. It sets up a lot. It's definitely more of a tone thing than a like an allusion to the inciting incident. We don't know what's going to happen that starts the inciting incident. But the reason I still like this beginning is because it's a prologue that does a really great job of setting the tone. The biggest thing is that we have a character who is actually going to narrate the story, narrating the prologue. So a lot of prologues will feature characters that don't actually matter to the story. So this one is by the character that is the most important character in the story. It's by the main character. So, you know, those two things, like introducing elements that are actually relevant to the story, setting the tone, establishing the world building, while also giving us an insight into the main character, and also being super interesting. So I think this prologue worked better than any prologue I've seen. So I really enjoyed that as an opening. So I have to wrap up because my camera battery is dying, but I'm going to link below to the playlist for this collab. Also, I'm going to link to the excerpts of the beginnings of Pride and Prejudice, Brightly Burning, and Dread Nation. They all happen to have excerpts online, so I thought it'd be really great for you to be able to see those and use them as a reference so you can see what I'm talking about. Please like, comment, subscribe, hit the little bell thing. Thank you guys so much for watching.